Good evening. Been in Revelation on Sunday night and wasn't here last Sunday night, but it's good. We're in the interlude. You know, I've said it over and over in this. 7 seals. Y'all got this, right? 7 seals, 7 trumpets, 7 bowls. Y'all got that, right? We all got that now. If we don't learn anything else from a study on Revelation, we should have that. 7 trumpets, 7 seals, 7 bowls. And in between the 7th seal and the first trumpet, and between the 7th trumpet and the first bowl, there's an interlude, and we're in that interlude. The interludes are meant to comfort Christians, to tell them that even though these things were coming to pass, that God was in control and that God was going to take care of them. And Revelation 12 and 13 is no different than that as we work towards pouring out the first bowl, which is going to happen before long. We have this interlude within this space. And in this interlude now, when we get to 12, we begin to introduce some things into Revelation that we haven't really looked at before. So you got to kind of think back to our 7 keys of Revelation, what these things mean, in order to kind of understand what we're introducing as we get into 12. In Revelation 12, it says, "A great sign appeared in heaven. A woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars, and she was with child. And she cried out, being in labor and in pain to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads, 10 horns. On his heads were 7 diadems. And his tail swept away 1/3 of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, who was about to give birth, so that when she gave birth, he might devour her child. And she gave birth to a son, a male child, who is to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God and to his throne. Then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by God, so that she would be nourished for 1,260 days. And there was a war in heaven." Stop there for a minute. So, hopefully there's some things in there you recognize in that little bit. So let's take what we know before we start talking about what we don't know, okay? So one thing we should know from our 7 keys of Revelation, because the Bible tells in Revelation, anytime we see dragon, means Satan, right? Devil, Satan. So anytime we see dragon in Revelation, we can just take that word out if we want to and put in Satan, okay? So we know that, for one thing. There's something else in this little passage that we should recognize. And although it's a little more obscure here, where it says 1,260 days, okay? But that is 1,260 days, right? We've talked about that. 42 months, time times time and a half. Every time we see that number in the book of Revelation, it's persecution against God's people, every time. And every time you see that in the Bible, in Revelation, as we talked about, it's an incomplete amount of time. So even though it's going to be persecuted, this is God's people going to be persecuted, it's not going to last, okay? Insignificant amount of time. The other thing we see in this is the devil, Satan, right, the dragon, swept away 1/3 of the stars of heaven. Anytime we see 1/3 in the book of Revelation, we talked about that, it means not complete. So even though he's going to do damage, not complete, okay? So those things we know. What we don't know is who's the woman, right, and who's the child. But it kind of makes sense, doesn't it, if you think about it? Christ's people have always been referred to as a woman, the bride of Christ, right? The church is the bride of Christ. Israel referred to as God's bride, right? So the woman kind of fits that. She's going to have a child who's going to rule the earth with a rod of iron. Well, the child that was brought to the earth through God's people was Christ, was it not? So it kind of makes sense. And Satan is waiting to devour the child, right? And he did, didn't he? And that was his chance to try to defeat God. But in that he failed. And the woman, the church, God's people, I don't think the woman here is exclusively the church. I think that the woman here is God's people throughout time, not just the church. Because I don't think the church brought the male child into existence. I think that was the Jews, God's people, the Israelites, that really brought us to Christ. But I think it concludes all that. Because after the birth of the child, she exists, doesn't she, as the church, and flees into the wilderness where Satan will try to attack her. But he's going to be unsuccessful because God's going to deliver her. And that is comforting. So there's 3 attacks. Number 1, he's going to devour the child. Number 2, he's going to be a war in heaven with Michael and his angels. Number 3, he's going to destroy the woman, right? He's going to destroy the woman, the church. And I think that's the collective spiritual body of God's people. So we take what we know and we build upon that. And that's what you have to do in this book. Take the things you know and build upon it. There was a war in heaven, verse 7. Michael and his angels waging war with the dragon, Satan, right? We know that. So we know that there's wars in heaven. Matter of fact, the scripture tells us that our battle's not against flesh and blood, but against the powers of the principalities in the heavenly realms. So we understand there's a war being waged in heaven. So that's nothing new. This is something that's been going on. But in this particular war, Jesus is victorious. The great dragon was thrown down, the serpent of old. Very much a Genesis passage. The only other place we see the devil being called the serpent is in the book of Genesis. No other place in the Bible do we see that. Now, we could say dragon was serpent, but it's not exactly the same word. And it really ties us to Genesis, where the serpent deceived Eve. And now, once again, in the book of Revelation, the beginning of the Bible, end of the Bible, interestingly enough, we bring back up the serpent, Satan. It says, it's called the devil and Satan. Plain and simple, isn't it? That's who the dragon is. Who deceives the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come. The kingdom has come, right? So when Christ died and the battle was waged and Satan tried to win, it didn't happen. And the kingdom came. So the kingdom's in existence now. We're not waiting for it. It's not a future event. The Bible's pretty plain. The kingdom is here and is present in our time, and we're part of that kingdom. He who accuses them before God day and night, and they overcame him because of the blood of the Lamb, because of the word of their testimony. They did not love their life, even when faced with death. This is talking about Christians. It doesn't say they love death, but it says they didn't love their life when faced with death. They knew that Christ is more important than their life, and the church is more important than their life. And this was comforting to them who now are giving their life for the gospel, for the church. For this reason rejoice. Woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has come down to you having great wrath, knowing that he has only a short time. So even though to us it seems like this battle's been going on a long time, essentially in God's idea, Satan only has a short time. Maybe not talking about all the time Satan has here, and I think we can talk about that through this passage, but talking about this specific time he's going to be persecuting the church the way he's persecuting it under Rome, because that time will come to an end before long. When the dragon saw that he was thrown to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. We said the woman now at this point is the church, because that's who it is. That's who fled into the wilderness. So who's the dragon, Satan, persecuting? The world? No. Why would he do that? He has the world, right? Satan's persecuting the church and still does to this day. And John in Revelation is trying to tell them, now Satan's been thrown out of heaven. What did Jesus say? Satan is a prince of this world, prince of this earth. Now he persecutes us, Christians. And it says, but the 2 wings of the great eagle, and that's interesting here. Valverde, who really takes this literally, end of times, millennialism, thinks that the wings of the eagle are the United States because the eagle is a sign of the United States. But where do you get that, right? It's interesting that the eagle in the Bible, it always represents strength and God's power. The faces of the seraphim, one's an eagle, right? Isaiah speaks about we will soar up on wings of eagle, we will, right? So that's true. But there's kind of another thing here. The symbol of Rome, the signet of Rome, was the eagle. Kind of interesting, I think. And what exactly John talks about here, I really don't know. Because the truth is that eventually Rome would embrace Christianity and make Christianity the state religion. About 200 years from the writing of this book, Rome would embrace Christianity. And I often wonder here, is he talking about symbolically about God, the wings of eagles, the wings, the strength of God bearing it? Or is he really even maybe talking here about Rome eventually embracing Christianity and embracing the faith? And I don't really have an answer to that. I think it's kind of an interesting question. She could fly to the wilderness to a place where she was nourished for how long? Times and a half. Anytime we talk about God's people, that's the duration. Times and a half. Not forever, but a period of time that she would be nourished and that she would rejuvenate herself from the presence of the serpent. And the serpent poured water out like a river in his mouth so that he might cause her to be swept away. But the earth helped the woman. And the earth opened his mouth and drank at the river which the dragon poured. So I really think here he's saying, number one, there's a battle in heaven with Michael and his angels, and Satan's defeated in heaven. But I think here he's assuring them that Satan will also be defeated on the earth. In other words, the earth itself is going to protect them from the dragon, from the serpent. And so they're even going to be protected on this earth. It says, so the dragon was enraged with the woman and went off to make war with the rest of her children who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. So that occurs to this day. So this is a time in this interlude, and not, I think, a lot here that can't be understood, essentially. It's not a really hard, I think, a hard chapter of the book of Revelation. Because I think we know the woman is God's people, whether we say throughout time of the church. The dragon is Satan. The things that are going on here are not going to go on forever. Times and a half. Third of the stars, things that are not going to happen forever. And also a reassurance that God's going to win in heaven and God's going to win in earth. And everything's going to be okay. And the woman, who is us, and her children, who is us, right, is going to be okay. God's going to take care of us. Because we're trying to reassure us before we start pouring out these bowls. We're trying to reassure before we start pouring out these bowls of what's going to take place. So I'm going to quit. I'm not going to do 13. Generally, I do 12 and 13 together. But I promised I would be slow. So I'm going to quit so we can kind of absorb what's going on. Because when we get into 13, we're going to introduce the beast. Okay? So that starts in 13. That's where we're going to start to introduce the beast. We're going to start to introduce these things that are coming up. So we need to, the first beast and the second beast, they come up together, and we're going to start to talk about that. So once again, here, comfort, okay? Persecution, death for sure, but comfort for sure, and victory for sure for God. And I think that's the message of Revelation 12 that he's trying to bring forward before we move on to Revelation 13. So I hope you're finding this interesting. Those people watching us online too, if you have questions, be sure and let me know, and I'll try to answer those questions. But I think 12 is kind of a pretty straightforward compared to a lot of the things we've seen. 12 is pretty straightforward, so I hope that helps a little bit. Thanks for your time this evening. If we can help in any way, let us know.